During our class videos, you may hear our poets and playwrights use terms that are new to you. We have created a list of key terms and definitions that you can refer to at any point during our video lectures. This list is available on the Videos and Readings class page, where you can read it or download it as a PDF. If you would like to find and review these terms while you watch each class video, you can stop this video, go back to the Videos and Readings class page, and download the PDF. There you can play this video and each of the following class videos. If you have any questions about these terms, we encourage you to ask your teaching team in the weekly class discussions. Eleni Sikelianos is the American author of 6 books of poetry and 2 hybrid memoirs. She teaches in the creative writing program at the University of Denver.
Hi there, my name is Eleni Sikelianos. I am a poet. I have published about 6 books of poems and 2 books of hybrid family histories. And I want to talk to you today about documentary poetics, which is a method, if we can call it a method or an approach, maybe an approach to the poem that has been really important to me in a number of my works, and also definitely important to me in the way that other poets have worked. And there's a long history of what we call documentary poetics here in the United States. Some of the first works in that, using that approach, came about in the 1930s, which was a time, as you probably know, of great social upheaval during the Great Depression. And it was a way for poets to talk about what was happening in the world in a time when social pressures felt very, very intense, and poets were seeking a way to include that in their poems. And so one of the earliest texts that uses the documentary poetic approach is Muriel Rukeyser's Book of the Dead, in which she uses a mining disaster in West Virginia as this kind of central piece of the poem. And she was a reporter, actually, as well as a poet, living in New York City, and she drove down to Gawley, West Virginia, where this accident had taken place. And she records not only the drive from New York to West Virginia, but also then met with miners, met with social workers who had interviewed miners. And she also used various documents from the mining disaster, including court documents, the miners' case against the mining company, which was Union Carbide, a company still in existence, which also has been involved in other kinds of accidents, in particular in India. So she used court case documents. She also used some of the doctors' testimony in the court case, where they describe what happened to a miner's lungs from silicosis. And those documents are included in the poem. And one of the things that Muriel Rukeyser said is poetry can extend the document. And that is just such a beautiful approach to my mind, that we have history. We have history of these great social events or of disasters. We have documents of these events, but poetry does something else. It approaches this material in another way. And I think one thing that happens when poetry approaches this material is that we feel it differently. Other writers and philosophers have talked about what happens in the gap between the archives. We have the archives, they represent facts. Poetry kind of operates in that space between the fact and the action, or in a kind of lacuna. So it's where we could say feeling might well up, or emotional response, or a different kind of knowing can arise in the poem that doesn't arise in the document. So that seems a very important approach to me. And it's also a way, we are potentially in another time of great social upheaval right now. And we have been, and we will be again. And so it's just an amazing way to include the world and what's happening in the world, to have a sort of social interaction in the poem as well. So I do actually want to talk about one other writer from this period, Charles Reznikoff, who used court cases from the late 1800s and early 1900s. And he actually used the language from these court cases and just shifted a little bit, just manipulated it, put in line breaks. He would also collect things from these many, many volumes of court cases and sift it down to what seemed most salient to him. And he was using these to reveal what happened to the disenfranchised or ordinary people during the great shift to industrialization. Something that he said that I think is really useful is, I didn't invent the world, but I felt it. And that might be another way for us to think about poetry extending the document, or working in the felt space in what's not said in the document. But we can think about Reznikoff and these other writers in a kind of, so if we look at the root of documentary, it's the Latin word docere, which means to teach. So this is also a way to think about this kind of work, that it also does have an injunction to teach us something. And it's not just to teach the reader, it is to teach the writer as well. So that it's a transformative approach, and the work is to transform, we're transforming how we might approach history. The writer might be seeking a transformation of understanding, and it also is something that might be instructive to a reader. When we're working with documentary poetics, there are different ways we might want to approach it. And Reznikoff, Rukeyser are poets who, and more contemporary poets, which we might get to too, Norbese Philip being one of them, they looked to documents and used documents and transformed written documents as the basis for what they're working on. A more recent poet to do that is the poet Layli Long Soldier, who is using an apology that President Obama made to Native Americans, and she took that text and has been manipulating it and changing it. So that's one approach. We take an existing document and we manipulate it in various ways to sort of reveal what other things might be behind that document, around that document, or what the felt material might be in the document. But there's also documentation that the poet herself might do. So you might, the poet Brenda Coltis, for example, who lives in the Bowery in New York, and felt that a great change was coming to the Bowery as it was being gentrified and changing. So she took a walk once a week and recorded everything she saw. All the trash she saw, all the chairs she saw. And so the poet herself might be the documenter. We don't just go to documents. Brenda Coltis was also interested in what she was inspired by Jane Jacobs, the sort of historian of cities, to become what she called a public figure. And so she also did interventions. So she, for example, set up a table in the Bowery, and she paid people $1 to tell her a Bowery story, and then she recorded them. So there are different kinds of ways of documenting, and I hope that you can think about and look to these poets for finding many kinds of methods to do that. So you might be wondering what this kind of poetry looks like, how it manifests, and it's a really wide range. If you look at, say, Norbese Philip's song, which uses the document of a court case also, in which the slaves on the slave ship Zong were thrown overboard so that ship owners could claim insurance on the slaves' lives. They were, because they were considered chattel. She takes this fairly short document and she explodes it. And so there are words and even letters scattered across the page. And you begin to have a sense, actually, of a kind of flotsam. The language is flotsam over the surface of the page, and we can feel ourselves almost drowning in the text. So it has a sort of form and content marriage. And they're very... they read also almost like prayers or salvo. There's sort of... they have a sort of last words feeling too. So, and I would call them absolutely lyric. Some of these poems, say Brenda Coltis's poems, might be more narrative and be in prose blocks and then be broken up by something that has line breaks or that is a list. And these do tend to be longer works. I think it's fair to say that there are poems we could call documentary poems that are short. We could call Frank O'Hara's lunch poems documentary. They're documenting his lunch hour in the 1950s and 60s, which is also, that's a document. Any poem, even the most lyric poem, is a document. I am very interested in that place where the lyric and the document meet. And I think that's what I was trying to get to when I was talking about the sort of lacuna between the document and the felt space. And that's where the lyric might rush up into this historical moment. But we can think of just about any poem as a document of its time, of its maker, and it's a question of how engaged a particular approach is with a greater outside world. Actually, I brought in just an example because I mentioned that I do work with this method a lot. And my most recent book, called Make Yourself Happy, the middle section is I wanted to record contemporary or modern extinctions of animals. And so I go continent by continent, and I just do 5 animals per continent. I hope someday to do more. But in the book itself, there's also a map of all the animals that have gone extinct, a globe, basically. And you can actually cut out this globe from the book and reassemble it. I've just half assembled it here. So these are pages from my most recent book that turn into a globe. And on the outside, you'll see the names of all the modern extinctions that I could find written where they occur on the globe. And on the inside, some of the poems that were dedicated to some of those animals. So this is another way to document something that's happening outside myself.